Hello, and welcome to another vlog. I am happy to say that I arrived home safely from Winnipeg Sunday night. It was a very long and successful trip, and I'd like to spend the duration of today's vlog talking a bit about it. So let's get started. So our trip started Thursday morning around 4 a.m. For those of you watching, a word of advice, do not get up at 4 a.m. Anyway, we got up and got ready to go, and we're on the road to the airport by about 4:30 in the morning. Anyway, we arrived at the airport at shortly after 6. We got to the parking lot, parked the van, and took the shuttle to the airport. And once we got to the airport, we checked in at the WestJet check-in desk because, we've talked about air travel a bit in the past, and I've explained why I choose WestJet over Air Canada. So we were flying with WestJet again, unsurprisingly. So we went to the check-in desk to get booked in for the flight, and we were there a little longer than we wanted to be because it turned out that we were in the wrong seat. So the WestJet agent had to spend a little bit of time rearranging the plane seating to get us in the right spot. So that took a few minutes and set us behind a little bit. So by the time we got through security, we were in a bit of a rush to board the plane. People with disabilities typically board the plane before everyone else, usually about 40 minutes before the plane takes off. So you can understand why we try to get to the airport so early. Anyway, because we were in a bit of a rush, we didn't really have time to get anything to eat before we went on the plane. Once we were on the plane, sitting, I wasn't able to because I wasn't sitting by the window, but my father was able to actually see them loading my wheelchair onto the plane. And, well, we had a bit of a Dave Carroll moment. For those of you watching Dave Carroll, you may remember him as the United Breaks guitar guy. Except instead of seeing them manhandle a guitar, we were seeing them manhandle my wheelchair, which is kind of terrifying when you think about it, because that's my mobility. So basically what they did, they were having trouble getting it on the plane, and in an act of, I guess we'll say, ignorance, they put the wheelchair on its side. You do not put a wheelchair on its side, especially not a power wheelchair. These are very heavy pieces of equipment with very important electronics on them, and if you put them on their side, you risk busting some of that very expensive and very important equipment. So here we are freaking out that they're putting my chair on the side and probably going to destroy it, putting it on the plane. So we tell the flight attendant, she lets the captain know, and he actually goes out on the tarmac and talks to them to sort everything out. So, we're sitting on the plane during the flight kind of, wondering, did my wheelchair make it to Toronto in one piece? So when we land in Toronto, I get off the plane and the chair's there at the gate. And fortunately for us, it's very minimal damage that was easily fixed. But it could have been much worse. Anyway, we had a very long layover in Toronto, about 3 hours, which gave us time to get a bite to eat before our next flight to Winnipeg. Boarded the plane, and a few hours later we landed in Winnipeg. When we got off the plane in Winnipeg, our driver was already waiting for us to pick us up and take us to the hotel. And once we got there, all of our accommodations were sorted out. Now, before we went, we requested an accessible room, and we did get one. Unfortunately, the room we got, although accessible, wasn't large enough to maneuver the Hoyer lift around the hospital bed, and the queen-size bed in the room was not able to be moved because it was built right into the wall. So what they did was they actually gave us a second room, which turned out to be the executive suite for us to sleep in. So we used the accessible room for toileting and showering, and then the executive suite was used for sleeping and relaxing. And the Council of Canadians with Disabilities covered all of our transportation and accommodations, so none of that was out of our own pocket, and I found both the hotel staff and the CCD staff to be very, very accommodating. So I'm quite happy about that. Now, the meeting itself was very long. There was a council meeting on Friday and then the AGM on Saturday. And we talked about quite a few things during the meetings. We talked about the United Nations and service dogs and accessibility legislation, among other things. We also elected the new executive and went over the strategic plan. Obviously, a lot more went on at the meetings than that, but that's just basically a brief overview of what happened. Um, like I said, they were long meetings, but they were also very successful, I thought. Um, and I met a lot of other individuals with disabilities and a lot of disability advocates, which was very good networking on my part. So I was quite pleased to get to know those people and connect with them, because I think that will really benefit me in my own advocacy work. Anyway, so Sunday morning we got up at 6 a.m. and headed back to the airport. Our shuttle was a little late getting to the hotel, but that didn't set us behind too much. Unfortunately, when we got to the Winnipeg airport, it turned out there was an evacuation. Apparently, there was a suspicious bag, so they evacuated the entire airport, passengers and staff, to the parkade where they waited for the police and bomb squad to kind of investigate. Once we were given the all clear, it was a false alarm, by the way. We were allowed back into the airport. Our flight was delayed by about 15 minutes. Even though we were outside for about an hour, our flight was only delayed for about 15 minutes. So it was a bit of a rush to get through check-in and security and get on the plane in time, but we did it. And we even managed to get a little bite to eat from Tim Hortons to take on the plane with us after we got through the secure area. So that was good. Anyway, we arrived in Toronto just a little later than we were supposed to. But again, we had a long 3-hour layover. Of course, by that point, it was more like a 2-hour layover. So we didn't have as much time at the airport as what we wanted, which was kind of disappointing because it meant that we didn't have time to see my sister who lives in Toronto. Anyway, we ran into a little issue because we forgot to take Deuce out to the bathroom. Deuce is my service dog. So Dad, who was traveling with me, had to leave the secure area and take her to the bathroom and then get back to the gate in time for us to get on the plane and get through security or to get on the plane. We were in the secure area, but he had to go back through security. So he had to leave the secure area, take the dog out, and then come back through security to get to the gate to board the plane in time. Anyway, we got on our flight in Toronto and landed in Halifax at the scheduled time. But when we went to get the luggage, it was missing. It takes a very long time for us to get off the plane, so by the time we get to the luggage pickup, most people have already gotten the luggage, and our luggage had been moved and put aside, but we couldn't find it. And shortly thereafter, the shuttle arrived to take us back to the parking lot to get the van. So in lieu of looking for the luggage, we got on the shuttle, went back to the parking lot, and picked up the van, and then we went back to the airport to see if we could find the luggage. Now, fortunately, when we got to the airport and went back inside to find the luggage, it was right there waiting for us. So we dodged a bullet there. We picked up our luggage, put it in the van, and then a few minutes later we were back on the road for the last leg of our journey, and we arrived home about shortly after 9 o'clock at night, exhausted from our long trip and a little jet lag because of the time change. It was only a 2-hour time difference, but that does add up after a while. Anyway, that's just a brief overview of our trip. As you can tell, it was very, very eventful. But I'm very thankful that it was successful and that we made it home safely. And, there were some positives from the trip as well. We got to fly in the plus section of the plane for all 4 flights, plus section being essentially WestJet's version of first class. That not only made it easier to get on and off the plane with the lift, but there's a lot of perks to being in first class. The hotel accommodations worked out wonderfully. We had access to the Eagle lift for every flight, so getting on and off the plane was super easy. If you don't know what the Eagle lift is, I did a previous vlog back about a year ago where I talked about traveling in a wheelchair. So watch that, and that kind of talks a little bit more about how people in wheelchairs get on and off the plane. And I'll actually give a link to that. I'll put it in the corner so you can click the little iCard in the corner and watch that video. Anyway, that's everything for today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. I mean it. And be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Anyway, that's everything for today, and see you next week.